Elden Ring is pretty fucking great. I think we can mostly agree on that. But that doesn't mean it is without some missed potential. And assuming we don't get a second DLC or a sequel anytime soon, this current post-Shadow of the Erdtree state is how the game is going to be talked about for the foreseeable future. As it stands, I really like the DLC. I started it, got my shit kicked in, felt like it was bullshit, played it again, and gained a more tempered appreciation for the boss design. But for all the interesting things that the DLC introduced, there's a lot that's left to be desired. There's something that I wish was in the base game that still hasn't been added with the DLC, and there's a few things I wish the DLC had expanded upon. Now, these are quality of life changes that some would say could potentially skew the balance of the game to becoming too easy, but this is Elden Ring. The game's balance is in constant flux, and there's still a myriad of ways to trivialize a challenge if you want to get silly with a build variety. As with all things within this game, whether or not you engage with it would be entirely up to you. Now, this list is prone to grow and change, and this is just a cursory script to bang out some ideas into existence before I inevitably forget about these ideas for the next thing, so I'll keep it brief. The base game should have included the ability to rematch bosses, like in Sekiro or Dark Souls 2, and the DLC should have had a much wider range of weapons within their new weapon types, and tools should just blanketly be more powerful. Think of this as me saying, Miyazaki, put these in Elden Ring 2 and my life is yours, or something like that. You get the deal. Also, important note, this will be covering DLC spoilers, such as specific bosses, so if you don't want to have that ruined for you, I suggest you just wait and play the DLC for yourself, then come back and watch this. First, the big one. This is something that I adored in Sekiro, and was pretty chill with in Dark Souls 2. Rematching bosses would have been such a boon, and would have made the base game even more replayable. Sure, a lot of the bosses repeat, so much so that in the base game, only a scant few are actually wholly unique encounters. But the fact remains that you can only defeat the Remembrance bosses once per playthrough, and to do them again would require either an entirely new character to play through the game up to that point again, or to do the same but with new game pluses of bloated enemy health and damage, all while taking a similar time frame to reach the boss, only to then beat them again and redo the cycle, should you want another rematch. This issue has only been exacerbated by the fact that the DLC bosses are all locked behind both Radahn and Mohg, which can both feasibly be beaten in a timely manner, but only if you know exactly what you're doing. On a personal level, I also want it as a means to practice against specific movesets, and to learn the timings of different weapon types against bosses. It's always annoying to beat a boss the first time in this game, since it feels like a lot of first victories come down to flukes. Take Millennia and Mesmer. A lot of people couldn't deal with the waterfowl dance when the game initially released, which meant that a lot of people who beat her wound up doing so because they were lucky with an attempt where she didn't use it. Recently, Mesmer had me feeling the exact same way with his massive snake barrage attack in his second phase. It's the kind of thing that I can't consistently dodge, and it would always fuck up my runs whenever he pulled it out. The first time I beat him, it was only because he didn't even do it. I think that the mindset of, this boss can always be rematched, would have also alleviated a lot of the discourse surrounding the boss design within this game. There's this intense drive that a lot of people seem to have to decimate a boss within the first few attempts, to adapt quickly and to get it done in a timely manner. But Elden Ring isn't like that. It's the most you will bang your head against this wall for hours type of game to come out of Miyazaki if you're intent on using a single build throughout the entire game. I feel that such a thing would help a lot of people loosen up on their stances of people using spirit summons to beat the game. Honest to God, it's just a personal pride thing if you beat the game in a specific way. It's a difficult game. Let people beat it how they want to. I feel that people would be a lot more comfortable with cheesing bosses the first time through if they were given the option to rematch them in a fairer context at a later point when they're more confident in their playstyle. Of course, scaling the boss damage and health would be difficult, because people who sequence break the game all know that Radahn is a lot less threatening when you've got a plus 10 Somberstone weapon and stats bloated beyond what's expected for that point in the game. And this is where this system could have taken a page out of Dark Souls 2's playbook. Just add a toggle that ratchets the difficulty up a new game cycle. Then you can have bosses like Godric and Radahn scaled up to test your mettle with your endgame build should you want to. This could also help alleviate a big issue people have with the Shadow Tree level system, where a lot of people wound up feeling overleveled with their blessings for bosses like Meteor, Shadow Tree Avatar, Gaius, and Midra, because the game doesn't properly convey a recommended level to you as fluidly as it does with the base game. Maybe give players an option to manually select from previous Shadow Tree levels to fight the Shadow of the Erdtree bosses at. I doubt this idea is perfect, but something like it would have been much appreciated, especially for a game as large as Elden Ring, where your average player can't clear the whole thing in under a day, like with most of the other Souls titles. The next two kind of intertwine, but I'll focus on them one at a time for now. These are Shadow of the Erdtree specific gripes, and the first one is the lack of variety amongst the new weapon types, be it with the new weapon classes introduced with the DLC, and the lack of coverage for some of the more understated damage types from the base game. You're telling me that there's this amazing new class of weapons purpose-made just for my playstyle, but that I only really get 3 options, and only one of them has modifiable scaling and can equip Ashes of War? Damn. When the most plentiful new weapon type in the game is the perfume bottles, that's when you've got to start asking some questions about priorities. Like, why did we only get 2 new madness weapons? And why do we still not have a dedicated Frenzied Flame sword? Why wasn't Midra's greatsword one of them? Don't give me the post-hoc lore BS about it being made to suppress the Frenzied Flame. 1, he can still channel madness even when stabbed with it, to the point where he even channels the Frenzied Flame through it during the boss fight proper. 2, that kind of kills the narrative weight of using Miquella's unalloyed needle to quell it in the base game. It makes that entire process feel a lot less important if there was a simpler solution the entire time. And 3, it's a remembrance boss weapon, which typically happened to be what the weapon was as you fought them, not as they used to be. You don't get the sword that the Blasphemous Blade was before Rykard ate all those people. You don't get Malekith's Black Blade in its undamaged state. And you don't get the restored version of the Axe of Godfrey. You get the weapons as your player remembers them. Sorry, side tangent. The idea that Midra's greatsword was just another holy greatsword really disappoints me, when we're still so starved for dedicated madness weapons. But regardless of stuff like that, the fact that statuses like Madness and Sleep only have a few dedicated weapons still feels like a bit of a waste, and it makes wanting to build characters around these statuses a lot more limiting. Even a dedicated Ash of War or Wet Blade that attaches Frenzy build-up to Fire Ashes, and or Sleep build-up to Magic Ashes would have gone a very long way. It's the DLC, made for the very endgame. They should go even more ham on giving players crazy shit to earn, and these would just add more build options without making our player characters into veritable gods, because as we all know, Frenzied Flame only works in PvP, and Sleep, while useful, isn't by any means a win condition. My final and honestly least important thing, maybe give some sort of talisman that buffs the scaling of tool type weapons. Things like the Omen Bands and the Wraith Calling Bell feel distinctly useless, since they're made to give non-spell users ranged options in the middle of combat, but seldom do they actually have the output to deal any real considerable damage, since their scaling only really works with dedicated casting builds, which tend to already have plentiful options for ranged spells by nature of being a fucking sorcery, incantation, or arcane build. Like, sure, there are ways to make these items useful if you specifically build for them, but they're also mostly time inefficient with how long they take to cast and with how they ground your character in place while using them. Just something to make these anywhere near viable would be nice, but not necessary, since even then, I doubt anyone would actually use them regardless. So that was my little list. I enjoy the game. These are just a few things that came to my mind of what could have been different while playing, and I hope that even if you disagree with my takes, that you can at least understand where they're coming from. Honestly, I'm still holding out a shred of hope for a Colosseum-style update in the future to bring in boss rematches, since I do think that would make the game perfect for me. If you have any ideas of your own that you wish had also been implemented in the game, then name them in the comments. And if you absolutely hated all my ideas, then I implore you to go to the comments also, and dismantle my entire video piece by piece. Preferably one comment for each sentence in this video. Sure, why not? If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, then I urge you to like the video and subscribe, alongside pressing that bell icon next to the subscribe button, because that will notify you whenever I next upload. And with that said, goodbye.